Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
She wrote, "Help" on the napkin, not knowing 50 Hell's Angel are watching her. The afternoon sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Maggie Parker sat hunched in her corner booth, her fingers absently pushing a piece of wilted lettuce around her plate. The quiet murmur of other diners and the gentle clink of silverware did nothing to calm her racing heart. She'd chosen this place carefully, far enough from her usual spots that he wouldn't think to look for her here, but close enough that she could still make it to work later. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie that usually brought comfort only made her stomach churn today. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, the ice cubes clinking against the sides. A truck rumbled past outside, and she flinched, her shoulders tensing. But it was just another passing vehicle, like the dozens before it. The elderly couple 2 booths over smiled warmly at her as they gathered their things to leave. Maggie tried to return their smile, but her lips wouldn't cooperate. Instead, she ducked her head, focusing on the pattern of her paper placemat, tracing the outlined states with her fingertip. Her throat felt tight as she reached for a clean napkin from the dispenser. The pen in her hand felt heavy as she wrote those 4 letters. H-E-L-P. She stared at the word, her vision blurring slightly. Such a small word for such a big need. With deliberate slowness, she let the napkin slip from her fingers, watching as it fluttered to the floor beside her booth. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story, the waitress passed by, offering a coffee refill. Maggie shook her head, her voice barely a whisper as she declined. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed to drown out everything else as she glanced at her watch for the 100th time. Through the large windows, she could see the nearly empty parking lot, the heat rising in waves from the black asphalt. A few cars were scattered about, a rusty pickup truck, a minivan with a car seat visible through the window, and her own beat-up Honda Civic that had seen better days. Maggie's fingers found the strap of her purse, clutching it like a lifeline. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe she should just leave, go back to... The deep rumble of multiple motorcycles cut through her thoughts like a knife. The sound grew louder, echoing off the buildings across the street as bike after bike pulled into the parking lot. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she watched them arrive. Dozens of them, their chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. Hell's Angels. Their leather vests bore the unmistakable patches and insignia that everyone in town knew to respect, or fear. They moved with an easy confidence as they dismounted their bikes, their boots crunching on the gravel. As they filed into the diner, the whole atmosphere of the place changed. Conversations died mid-sentence. The cook peeked out from the kitchen window. Even the ceiling fans seemed to slow their spinning. Maggie sat perfectly still, trying to make herself invisible as they filled the space with their presence. Their leader stepped through the door last, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and arms covered in intricate tattoos. His presence commanded attention without him saying a word. His eyes swept the diner in a practiced scan, and for a brief moment they locked with Maggie's. She couldn't look away, caught in his gaze like a deer in headlights. Something in those eyes, something she couldn't quite name, made her pulse quicken for reasons entirely different from her earlier fear. The Hell's Angels settled into their chosen spot, pulling together several tables to accommodate their large group. Their leather vests creaked as they sat down, the sound mixing with the scrape of chairs against the floor. The diner seemed to shrink around them, their presence filling every corner of the small space. Maggie's fingers twisted the paper napkin in her lap until it became a tight, worried ball. She could feel their eyes on her, quick glances that tried to be subtle but weren't. Her cheeks burned under their attention, and she wished she could disappear into the vinyl booth seat. The waitress approached their table with visible nervousness, her notepad shaking slightly as she took their orders. But the bikers were surprisingly polite, their voices low and respectful as they requested burgers, fries, and coffee. Their behavior didn't match their intimidating appearance, but that only made Maggie more confused and anxious. Jax sat at the head of the table, his massive frame dwarfing the metal chair beneath him. His weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug that looked tiny in his grip. Every so often his eyes would drift to Maggie's corner, his gaze thoughtful and measured. There was something in the way he looked at her, not threatening, but searching, as if trying to solve a puzzle. She watched from beneath her lashes as he leaned over to whisper something to the man next to him. The other biker nodded, his eyes flicking briefly to the floor near her booth where the napkin still lay. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. Had they seen her drop it? Did they know what it said? Forcing herself to appear casual, she picked up her fork and pushed the remaining lettuce around her plate. The salad had long since gone warm, the dressing congealing unappetizably. Her hands trembled so badly she had to set the fork down, the soft clink seeming unnaturally loud in her ears. The biker's food arrived, filling the air with the smell of grilled meat and hot fries. They ate and talked among themselves, their deep voices a constant rumble of conversation. But there was an undercurrent of tension, like they were waiting for something. Maggie reached for her purse, thinking maybe she could slip out unnoticed, while they were distracted with their meal. But before she could stand, she saw movement from their table. Jax was getting up, his chair scraping against the floor. Her pulse quickened as he made his way toward her booth, his steps measured and deliberate. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, weaving between tables with ease. The afternoon sun streaming through the window caught the silver in his beard and the edges of his tattoos. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, not from anger or meanness, but from squinting into the wind on long rides. When he reached her table, he tapped it gently with 2 fingers, the sound making her jump slightly. His voice, when he spoke, was unexpectedly soft, like distant thunder. "You okay, kid? Need some help?" Maggie stared up at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her mind raced with conflicting impulses, the urge to run warring with an unexpected feeling of safety in his presence. I, she stammered, her voice barely more than a whisper, caught between her desperate need for help and her ingrained fear of trusting strangers. Jax lowered his large frame into the booth across from Maggie, the vinyl seat creaking under his weight. His presence filled the small space, but somehow he managed to make himself seem less intimidating. He rested his forearms on the table, his tattooed hands clasped loosely together. "Listen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's in trouble." His blue eyes were kind beneath his furrowed brows, creating an unexpected gentleness that contrasted with his rough exterior. Maggie's gaze darted between Jax and the napkin still lying on the floor. Her throat felt tight, and she couldn't seem to find her voice. The sounds of the diner, clinking silverware, murmured conversations, the sizzle of the grill, seemed to fade into the background. "You don't have to tell me anything," Jax continued, reaching for a clean napkin from the dispenser. "But I want you to have this." He pulled a pen from his leather vest pocket and began writing, his large hands moving with surprising precision across the paper. The rest of the Hell's Angels remained at their table, but Maggie could feel their protective presence extending throughout the diner. They weren't watching directly, but she knew they were aware of everything happening around them. "If you ever need anything, call me," Jax said, sliding the napkin across the table. His phone number was written in clear, steady numbers. Day or night. Doesn't matter what it is. Maggie's hand trembled as she reached for the napkin. The paper felt fragile between her fingers, like it might dissolve at any moment. She stared at the numbers, trying to comprehend how this intimidating man had somehow become a potential lifeline. She started, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." The words came out small and uncertain, but Jax nodded as if he understood everything she couldn't say. "We look after our own in this town," he said, his voice carrying that same gentle authority. "And sometimes that means looking after folks who need it, even if we just met them." Maggie carefully folded the napkin and tucked it into her purse. Her hands were still shaking, but something in her chest had loosened slightly. It felt strange to find comfort in the presence of someone who, just minutes ago, had terrified her. "I should go," she whispered, gathering her things. Jax stood up to let her out of the booth, taking a step back to give her space. The walk to the diner's exit felt like it took forever. Maggie's legs were unsteady, and her heart hammered against her ribs. The napkin in her purse seemed to burn with possibility, or maybe warning. She wasn't sure which. As she pushed open the glass door, the bell above it chiming softly, the afternoon sun hit her face. The parking lot stretched out before her, the heat rising in waves from the asphalt. Her footsteps echoed in her ears as she made her way across the lot. Something made her turn back for one last look. Through the large window, Jax stood watching, his powerful frame silhouetted against the diner's interior. His expression was unreadable at this distance, but his stance spoke of vigilance and protection. Yet even with his obvious concern, Maggie felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. She clutched her purse tighter, feeling the napkin with his number inside, and continued walking, caught between gratitude and fear. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop buzzed overhead as Maggie wiped down another table. Her uniform, a faded blue dress with a white apron, had seen better days, just like the rest of the place. The familiar smell of coffee and greasy food filled the air, mixing with the diesel fumes that drifted in every time the door opened. 3 days had passed since her encounter with the Hells Angels. 3 days of normal life, if you could call it that. She moved through her shifts like always, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and dodging the occasional inappropriate comment from tired truckers. But something had changed inside her. Every time the door chimed, her heart would skip a beat. She'd look up, half expecting to see Jax's broad shoulders filling the doorframe. But it was never him. "Order up," Jerry, the cook, called from the kitchen window. His voice snapped her back to reality. Maggie grabbed the plates, her movements automatic after years of practice. As she served the food to a couple of regulars, her mind wandered back to that afternoon at the diner. The way Jax had looked at her, not through her, like most people did, but really looked at her, like she mattered. During her break, she sat in the employee locker room, staring at her open locker door. The napkin with Jax's number was tucked inside her wallet, hidden behind her driver's license. She hadn't thrown it away, though she'd thought about it at least a dozen times. "You okay there, Mags?" Sarah, another waitress, asked as she changed out of her uniform. "You've been awful quiet lately." "I'm fine," Maggie replied, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired." The rest of her shift dragged on. A truck driver spilled his coffee. A family with 3 screaming kids left a mess that took forever to clean up, and her feet ached from standing for 8 hours straight. Normal problems, safe problems, not like the bigger ones she was running from. When her shift finally ended, Maggie changed out of her uniform and stepped into the parking lot. The summer evening was warm, and the sky had turned a deep purple. The lot was half full of semis, their drivers either sleeping in their cabs or inside grabbing a late dinner. She sat on the concrete barrier at the edge of the lot, pulling out her phone and wallet. The napkin was still crisp, Jax's numbers clear and steady. Her phone screen glowed in the growing darkness as she stared at the keypad. Her finger hovered over the numbers. What would she even say? "Hi, remember me? The scared girl from the diner?" It seemed ridiculous now. Maybe he'd already forgotten about her. Maybe the offer of help had just been a polite gesture, nothing more. But she could still picture his eyes, kind beneath that tough exterior. The way his voice had softened when he spoke to her. The protective presence of his crew, watching over her without making her feel threatened. Maggie looked at the phone in her hand, then back at the napkin. The numbers seemed to blur together as she considered her options. Part of her wanted to reach out, to take that first step toward something. Change, maybe. Or just connection. Instead, she lowered the phone and shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. Maggie's apartment was small, just a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so tiny she could barely turn around in it. But it was hers, and usually that was enough. Tonight, though, the walls felt like they were closing in. She sat cross-legged on her second-hand couch, a cup of cold tea on the coffee table in front of her. The evening news played quietly on her old TV, but she wasn't really watching. Her mind was somewhere else, lost in the weight of everything. Her mother's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter. The latest one had arrived today, another reminder that her waitress salary barely covered the basics, let alone the expensive treatments her mom needed. The guilt of not being able to do more ate at her constantly. The shadows of her past relationships lingered too. Tom's angry voice still echoed in her head sometimes, making her flinch at sudden movements. Before him, there had been Derek, whose sweet words had turned bitter so quickly. She'd thought she was being careful, thought she'd learned her lesson each time, but somehow she kept finding herself with men who took pieces of her until she felt hollow inside. Maggie reached for her purse and pulled out her wallet. The napkin was there, just where she'd left it. The numbers were starting to fade a little at the creases where she'd folded and unfolded it so many times, just looking at it, wondering. Her hands trembled as she smoothed out the napkin on her knee. Jax's handwriting was strong and clear, just like him. She thought about his eyes, how they'd seen right through her carefully constructed walls that day at the diner, how he'd known she needed help before she'd even spoken a word. A tear splashed onto the napkin, making one of the numbers blur slightly. Maggie wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, surprised to find she was crying. She hadn't even realized she'd started. Her phone sat heavy in her other hand. The screen glowed in the dimness of her apartment, casting shadows on her face. She'd dialed Jax's number at least a dozen times over the past few days, always deleting it before pressing call. But tonight was different. Tonight, the silence in her apartment was too loud, the walls too close, the burden too heavy to carry alone anymore. With shaking fingers, she punched in the numbers. Her heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe... Hello? Jax's deep voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar even though she'd only heard it once before. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She almost hung up, almost lost her nerve completely. "Hey, Maggie, you need something?" The gentleness in his voice broke something inside her. Her vision blurred with fresh tears. "I don't know if I'm okay, Jax," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The silence that followed felt endless, though it probably only lasted a few seconds. "I'm coming over," he said firmly. "Stay where you are." Maggie let out a shaky breath, feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't quite relief. She was still too scared for that. But it was something close to hope, a tiny spark in the darkness she'd been living in for so long. The rumble of motorcycles broke through the quiet night. Maggie stood at her window, watching as several bikes pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex. Under the yellow glow of the street lamp, she could make out Jax's broad shoulders as he dismounted his bike. 3 other riders stayed back near their motorcycles, their presence somehow reassuring rather than threatening. A few minutes later, a gentle knock echoed through her apartment. Maggie opened the door to find Jax filling the entire doorframe. Up close, he seemed even bigger than she remembered, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her shoulders relax slightly. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Maggie nodded, stepping aside. Her tiny apartment suddenly felt smaller with his presence, but not in an uncomfortable way. He moved carefully, like a big cat trying not to startle anyone, and settled onto her worn couch. The piece of furniture seemed to shrink beneath his frame. "Nice place," he said, looking around with genuine interest rather than judgment at her modest home. "It's not much," Maggie replied, perching on the other end of the couch. "But it's mine." "Sometimes that's all we need," Jax said, nodding. "A place to call our own." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Through the window, Maggie could see the other riders, standing guard like silent sentinels. "They're just making sure everything's okay," Jax explained, following her gaze. "We take care of our own." "But I'm not—" Maggie started, then stopped. "You called," Jax said simply. "That makes you our concern." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Maggie's eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but Jax noticed. "Want to tell me what's going on?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Maggie took a deep breath. "It's everything," she began hesitantly. "My mom's sick. Cancer. The bills keep coming, and I can barely keep up with rent, let alone help her with treatment costs." The words started tumbling out faster. "I work double shifts whenever I can, but it's never enough. And then there's—" She paused, her voice catching. "The men who hurt you," Jax finished quietly. Maggie nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "I thought I was smart enough to avoid the bad ones, you know? But they always seemed so nice at first. By the time I realized who they really were—" She shuddered slightly. "Some people are good at hiding who they really are," Jax said. His hands, resting on his knees, tightened briefly before relaxing again. "I just feel so stupid," Maggie whispered. "So weak." "You're not weak," Jax said firmly. "You're still here, still fighting, still taking care of your mom, still getting up every day and facing the world. That's not weakness, Maggie, that's strength." Something in his words, in the way he said them like they were simple facts rather than comfort, made Maggie's chest tighten. She found herself telling him everything about Derek's manipulation, Tom's rage, the constant fear, the loneliness, the struggle to trust anyone again. Jax listened without interrupting, his presence steady and reassuring. When she finally fell silent, emotionally drained but somehow lighter, he turned to face her fully. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "We've all been through our own hells." Maggie looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. His eyes held understanding, not pity, and something in her chest loosened. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, and she saw it mirrored in Jax's eyes. Morning sunlight streamed through Maggie's bedroom window, painting warm patterns on her worn quilt. For the first time in months, she hadn't tossed and turned all night. The weight of yesterday's conversation with Jax still lingered, but it felt different now, lighter somehow, as if sharing her burdens had actually made them easier to carry. She got ready for her shift at the truck stop with unusual care, brushing her hair until it shone and even adding a touch of lip gloss. In the mirror, she noticed something different in her reflection. Her shoulders weren't as hunched, her eyes looked clearer. The familiar smell of coffee and diesel greeted her as she pushed through the truck stop's heavy doors. Sally, her co-worker, did a double take when she saw her. "Well, look who decided to join the land of the living," Sally said, adjusting her name tag. "You look different today, hun." Maggie felt her cheeks warm. "Just slept better, I guess." As she tied her apron around her waist, Maggie found herself humming, something she hadn't done in ages. The morning rush kept her busy, but she moved through it with a strange, new energy. Even the usual difficult customers didn't seem to bother her as much. During her break, she called the hospital to check on her mom. The nurse reported that she'd had a good morning and even managed to eat breakfast. Maggie closed her eyes, savoring this small victory. It wasn't much, but today, it felt like enough. Back at work, she found herself thinking about Jax's words from the night before. "We've all been through our own hells." There was something comforting about that. The idea that she wasn't alone in her struggles, that even someone as strong as Jax had faced his own battles. She was refilling the napkin dispensers when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart did a little jump when she saw Jax's name on the screen. They'd exchanged numbers properly before he left last night, but she hadn't expected him to message so soon. "Coffee at the diner? Around 3?" the text read. Maggie's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her, the old, fearful part, wanted to make an excuse. But another part, one that felt new and surprisingly strong, wanted to say yes. She thought about how safe she'd felt talking to him last night, how his presence had somehow made her tiny apartment feel like a sanctuary instead of a hiding place. Her phone buzzed again. "No pressure, just coffee." Those 3 words, just coffee, somehow made it easier. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding. He was offering something simple, something normal, something she could handle. Taking a deep breath, Maggie typed her response. "I'll be there." As soon as she hit send, her stomach fluttered with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. It wasn't quite fear. At least, not the kind she was used to. It felt more like anticipation, like standing on the edge of something new. Sally caught her eye from across the counter and raised an eyebrow. "Must be some text to put that smile on your face." Maggie touched her cheeks, surprised to find she was indeed smiling. "Just coffee," she said softly, more to herself than to Sally. But for the first time in a long while, just felt like more than enough. The bell above the diner door chimed as Maggie stepped inside. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the checkered floor, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Jax was already there, his large frame somehow making the booth seem smaller. He stood when he saw her, offering a gentle smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Glad you made it," he said, his voice warm and genuine. Maggie slid into the booth across from him, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks for inviting me." Betty, the elderly waitress who'd been working at the diner for as long as anyone could remember, shuffled over with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Here you go, dears," she said, setting them down with practiced ease. Maggie wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but she still felt nervous, unsure of what to say. Jax took a sip of his coffee and leaned back. "You know, I wasn't always the guy you see now," he began, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his mug. "Did 2 tours in Afghanistan before all this. Marine Corps." Maggie looked up, surprised by his openness. The sunlight caught the silver in his beard as he spoke, making him look older, wiser. "Coming back was tough," he continued. "Felt lost for a while. That's when I found the angels." His voice softened with affection. "Or maybe they found me?" He told her about his early days with the club, how they'd given him purpose when he needed it most. "We're not what people think," he said, shaking his head. "Sure, we look rough. And yeah, we've got our reputation. But at our core, we're family." Maggie listened as he shared stories about helping veterans adjust to civilian life, organizing charity rides for children's hospitals, and supporting members through tough times. His voice carried pride, not bravado, and his eyes lit up when he talked about his brothers. "Last winter," he said, "one of our guys lost his house in a fire. Within 24 hours, we had the whole club mobilized. Some offered their spare rooms, others helped salvage what they could. We even got together to help rebuild." The afternoon light had shifted, casting a golden glow across their table. Maggie found herself relaxing into the conversation, drawn in by Jax's storytelling and the genuine warmth in his voice. "That's what family does," he explained, his voice growing softer. "We look out for each other. No questions asked, no judgment. Everyone's got a past, Maggie. What matters is who stands beside you while you face it." Maggie felt something shift inside her chest, a wall beginning to crumble, or maybe a door starting to open. For so long, she'd carried her burdens alone, convinced that's just how life had to be. But sitting here, listening to Jax talk about family and belonging, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. Their coffee cups had long since emptied, but neither seemed eager to leave. The diner had grown quiet around them, caught in that peaceful lull between lunch and dinner. Jax reached across the table, placing his large hand over hers. His touch was gentle, steadying. "You're welcome here, Maggie. Anytime." Maggie looked up at him, her heart beating faster. She smiled softly. "Thanks, Jax." The afternoon sun had begun its descent when Maggie returned to the diner. After her coffee with Jax, she'd realized she'd left her phone charger at her usual booth. The warmth from their conversation still lingered, making her feel lighter than she had in months. The bell chimed as she pushed open the door. The diner was quieter now, with only a few regulars scattered among the booths. But as Maggie took a step inside, the air suddenly felt different, heavier somehow. A woman sat at the counter, her back straight as a rod. Her ash-blonde hair was perfectly styled, falling in elegant waves past her shoulders. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Maggie made in a month. Everything about her screamed money and class. The woman turned, and Maggie felt her stomach drop. Even before their eyes met, she knew who this had to be. Claire, Jax's ex-wife. The stories about her beauty hadn't been exaggerated, but neither had the ones about her cold demeanor. Claire's gaze swept over Maggie like a winter wind, taking in her waitress uniform and scuffed shoes. Her perfectly painted lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Well," she said, her voice carrying across the diner. "What do we have here?" Maggie's cheeks burned. She tried to move toward her old booth, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. Claire's presence seemed to fill the entire room, making everything else fade into the background. "You must be the new friend I've been hearing about," Claire continued, each word precise and cutting. She swiveled on her stool, crossing her long legs with deliberate grace. "Maggie, isn't it?" Maggie managed a small nod, hating how small she felt under Claire's scrutiny. The confidence she'd built during her conversation with Jax began to crumble. The door chimed again, and one of the Hell's Angels walked in, an older man Maggie recognized from their group. Claire's face lit up with practiced charm. "Tommy," she called out. "Come sit with me, darling. It's been ages." Tommy hesitated for a moment, glancing between Claire and Maggie before making his way to the counter. Claire patted the stool next to her, her diamond rings catching the light. "I was just telling everyone I'm back in town," Claire announced, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. She leaned toward Tommy conspiratorially. "For good this time. There are some loose ends that need tying up." Her eyes flicked to Maggie again, sharp and calculating. The message was clear. She wasn't just passing through. This was her territory, and she was here to reclaim it. Maggie's fingers curled around the strap of her purse. She'd forgotten all about her phone charger. Right now, she just needed to get out of there. The weight of Claire's presence, the perfectly measured hostility in her voice, the way she so effortlessly commanded attention. It was all too much. As Maggie backed toward the door, Claire turned back to Tommy, dismissing her as easily as swatting away a fly. Their conversation drifted across the diner, Claire's laugh tinkling like ice in a glass. She belonged here, among these people, in a way Maggie never would. The bell chimed one final time as Maggie pushed through the door, escaping into the cooling evening air. Behind her, through the diner's window, she could see Claire holding court at the counter. Every inch the queen returned to her kingdom. The knock on Maggie's apartment door came just after 9. She'd been curled up on her worn couch, trying to forget the encounter with Claire, when she heard the familiar rhythm of Jax's knock. Her heart jumped, but something in the pattern seemed hesitant, uncertain. When she opened the door, Jax stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway. The usual confidence in his stance was gone, replaced by a heaviness that seemed to weigh down his shoulders. His eyes, usually so direct, couldn't quite meet hers. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. Maggie stepped aside, letting him enter. The small living room seemed to shrink with his presence. He paced for a moment, running a hand through his beard, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of distress. "I guess you met Claire today," he finally said, stopping by the window. The streetlight outside cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more worn. "Yes." Maggie's voice came out barely above a whisper. She sat down on the edge of the couch, bracing herself. Jax took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you." He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her stomach clench. "Claire, she's pregnant. With my child." The words hung in the air between them. Maggie felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. She gripped the edge of the couch cushion, trying to steady herself. "It happened about 3 months ago," Jax continued, his voice strained. "Before I met you. We had a moment of weakness. Things were complicated between us. They always have been." He moved closer but didn't sit down. "I just found out today. She came to tell me in person." Maggie nodded slowly, processing his words. The image of Claire at the diner took on new meaning. Her confident smile, the way she'd looked at Maggie like she already knew how this would end. "I don't know what to do," Jax admitted, running his hand through his beard again. "Claire and our history is messy. There's still care there, but it's tangled up with so much hurt." He finally sat down beside her, the couch dipping under his weight. I can't abandon my child. But Claire, she has a way of using situations to her advantage. The silence stretched between them. Maggie could feel the torment radiating from him, could see the conflict in every line of his body. This man, who had seemed so solid and sure just hours ago over coffee, now looked lost. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said softly. These past few weeks with you, they've meant something to me, Maggie. Something real. Maggie's throat felt tight, but she forced herself to look at him. Despite everything, her heart ached for his pain. She reached out and touched his arm gently, feeling the tension in his muscles. You have to do what's right for you, Jax, she said quietly. He nodded but turned away, unable to meet her eyes. The guilt was written clearly across his face, in the set of his jaw, in the way his shoulders slumped. Without another word, he stood and walked to the door. Maggie watched him leave, the door closing softly behind him. The apartment felt emptier than ever, and she wondered if their connection, still so new and fragile, could survive the weight of his past. The days after Jax's revelation dragged by like years. Maggie went through her shifts at the truck stop in a daze, dropping orders and mixing up tickets. Her manager had noticed, giving her concerned looks, but she couldn't bring herself to explain. She'd see Jax's motorcycle parked outside Claire's house on her way to work. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of them talking on the porch, Claire's elegant figure leaning close to him, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Each time, Maggie's heart would squeeze painfully in her chest. The text messages from Jax grew shorter, less frequent. "Can't make it today?" became a common phrase. When they did talk, his mind seemed elsewhere, his responses distracted. The warm connection they'd shared over coffee felt like a distant memory. One particularly rough morning, Maggie's car wouldn't start. Usually she would have called Jax without hesitation. Now her finger hovered over his name in her contacts before she finally called a cab instead. The ride to work cost her half a day's wages, but it hurt less than hearing another excuse. At the diner where they'd first met, the Hells Angels still came around, but Jax was rarely with them. The crew treated her kindly, but she could see the awkwardness in their eyes. They were caught between their loyalty to their leader and their growing friendship with her. "He's just got a lot on his plate," one of them told her one day, trying to be helpful. "With Claire and the baby and all." Maggie just nodded and refilled their coffee cups, pretending the words didn't sting. Her old fears started creeping back in, the ones that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve happiness. The napkin with Jax's number, once a symbol of hope, now sat crumpled at the bottom of her purse. One evening, after her shift, Maggie walked past the motorcycle club's hangout. She hadn't meant to stop, but Jax's voice caught her attention. He was standing just inside the open garage door with Tommy, one of his closest friends in the club. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," Jax's voice carried clearly through the quiet evening air. "Claire's carrying my kid. She wants us to be a family again." "What about Maggie?" Tommy asked. There was a long pause, and Maggie held her breath. She knew she should walk away. That eavesdropping would only hurt her, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. "Maggie?" Jax sighed heavily. "She's sweet, but maybe I was fooling myself. Claire and I have history. We know each other's darkness. With Maggie, it's different. She's..." He trailed off. "Too good," Tommy supplied. "Too pure," Jax agreed. "Maybe I was just trying to prove something to myself, that I could be better than my past. But with Claire pregnant, I don't know if I can walk away from that, or if I even should." The words hit Maggie like physical blows, each one carved deeper than the last, confirming every insecurity she'd been fighting. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste to get away. Too pure. The words echoed in her head as she hurried down the street, vision blurring with tears. After everything she'd shared with him about her past, her struggles, he still saw her as some delicate, breakable thing. Not as someone strong enough to stand beside him, but as someone too good for his world. The betrayal burned in her chest, mixing with the familiar ache of abandonment. She'd let herself believe in something different this time, but in the end, nothing had changed. She was still the one left behind. Maggie's feet carried her to the diner without conscious thought. The familiar bell chimed as she pushed through the door, its cheerful sound at odds with the heaviness in her heart. The evening crowd had thinned out, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. She slid into her usual corner booth, the vinyl seat squeaking beneath her. The same booth where everything had started, where she'd first dropped that desperate plea for help. Now she felt just as lost, maybe even more so. Sarah, the evening waitress, brought her a cup of coffee without being asked. "You okay, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maggie managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, thanks, Sarah." But she wasn't fine. Jax's words kept replaying in her head. Too pure. Like she was some delicate flower that needed protecting, not someone who'd survived her own battles. She'd thought he understood her better than that. Her hands trembled as she pulled a napkin from the dispenser. The white paper seemed to mock her with its blankness. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her pen and wrote 4 words that captured the emptiness inside her. "I don't know who I am anymore." The words stared back at her, stark and honest. She'd spent so much time being what other people needed or wanted her to be. The dutiful daughter caring for her sick mother. The girlfriend trying to please abusive partners. Now, trying to fit into Jax's world while competing with his past. She'd lost herself somewhere along the way. The coffee grew cold as she sat there, studying those words. The diner's familiar sounds washed over her, the clink of dishes, the soft murmur of conversations, the hiss of the grill. Outside, the rumble of motorcycles approached, and her heart clenched. She knew that sound too well now. Through the window, she watched several Hell's Angels pull into the parking lot. Rusty was among them, his weathered face visible as he removed his helmet. He was one of the quieter ones, always kind to her in his own gruff way. Maggie gathered her things, not wanting to face any of them right now. But as she stood, her movement knocked the napkin onto the floor. Before she could retrieve it, Rusty had already stepped inside and spotted it. He picked up the napkin, his eyes scanning the words. His expression softened as he looked up at her, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. "Sit down for a minute, darling," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Maggie hesitated, then sank back into the booth. Rusty slid in across from her, placing the napkin between them. "You know," he began, his rough voice surprisingly soft. "Sometimes we lose ourselves trying to be what others want us to be, but that don't mean we're lost for good." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. I thought I'd finally found somewhere I belonged." "You have," Rusty said firmly. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his calloused one. "Listen here, Maggie. Whatever's going on with Jax and Claire, that's their mess to sort out. But you're family now, and we take care of our own." The tears spilled over as Rusty squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone," he said. "We got your back." The knock on her door startled Maggie from her thoughts. She'd been sitting in her dimly lit living room, staring at old family photos, trying to remember who she was before all the pain and disappointment had shaped her into someone she barely recognized. Through the peephole, she saw Jax shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. Her heart skipped a beat, but she hesitated before opening the door. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Maggie stepped aside, letting him enter. The small apartment seemed to shrink with his presence. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair, before finally turning to face her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "About Claire, about the baby, about us." He took a deep breath. "I've been letting my past control everything. Every decision, every relationship, every chance at happiness." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture she'd developed over years of protecting herself from hurt. "Jax, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted, taking a step closer. "I need to say this. Claire coming back. It stirred up all these old feelings, but not the kind you might think. It reminded me of all the mistakes I made, all the ways I let myself be manipulated." His voice grew softer. "And then there's you." The way he said it made her chest tighten. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You showed up with that napkin, asking for help, and somehow you ended up helping me instead. You made me want to be better, to be worthy of someone like you." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "I want to be with you, Maggie, but I know it's not simple. There's the baby to consider, and Claire will always be part of that equation. It won't be easy." Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes. His words were everything she'd wanted to hear, but fear gripped her heart like an iron fist. She'd heard beautiful promises before, had believed in them, only to have them shattered along with her trust. She started, her voice trembling. She pulled her hand away gently. "I need time, Jax. I've been here before. Not exactly here, but close enough. People make promises, say all the right things, and then—" She wiped at a tear that had escaped. "I've been let down so many times. Each time it gets harder to trust again." Jax nodded slowly, understanding and hurt mingling in his expression. "I get it. I do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, the original napkin with her help message. "I kept this to remind me that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who ask for help. Take all the time you need, Maggie. I'll be here." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Just remember, you're not alone anymore. Whether as more than friends or not, you've got family now." As the door closed behind him, Maggie sank onto her couch, her heart torn between the warmth of his words and the ice-cold fear of being hurt again. She picked up one of the family photos she'd been looking at earlier, tracing the image of her younger, more trusting self, wondering if she could ever be that person again. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Maggie wiped down tables, her mind wandering to thoughts of Jax, when the bell above the door chimed. Her stomach dropped as Claire walked in, elegant as always in her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Claire made her way directly to Maggie's section, sliding into a booth with the grace of a cat stalking its prey. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying the sharp edge of authority. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cleaning rag. "I'm working, Claire. This won't take long." Claire's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the table's surface. "Sit down." Maggie hesitated, then slid into the seat across from Claire. The older woman's cold eyes studied her, making Maggie feel small and exposed. "Let's be clear about something," Claire began, her voice low and controlled. "Jax and I have history. We're having a baby together. You're nothing but a temporary distraction, A charity case he picked up because he can't help trying to fix broken things. The words stung, but Maggie kept her face neutral. She'd learned long ago not to show weakness to people like Claire. "I'm offering you a chance to walk away with dignity," Claire continued. "Leave now before things get messy, because trust me, I can make your life very complicated." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I have connections you couldn't imagine. One phone call, and that little job of yours could disappear. Your mother's medical care? Those arrangements could become difficult." Maggie's heart raced, but something inside her, something that had been growing stronger since the day she dropped that first help note, refused to back down. She thought of Jax's kindness, of the family she'd found in the Hells Angels, of the person she was becoming. "No," Maggie said, her voice quiet but firm. Claire's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Maggie's voice grew stronger. "I won't let you threaten me. I won't let you use my mother against me. And I won't let you decide what Jax and I mean to each other." "You stupid girl," Claire hissed. "You have no idea what you're getting into." "Maybe not," Maggie admitted. "But I know what I'm not doing anymore, letting fear control my life." She stood up, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Claire's face twisted with anger. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Maggie replied, though inside she wondered if she was strong enough to weather whatever storm Claire might bring. Maggie walked out of the diner, the morning air cool against her flushed cheeks. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled for her car keys. Before she could reach her car, her phone rang. Jax's name flashed on the screen. She answered, her voice unsteady. "Hello?" "I just ran into Claire," Jax said without preamble. His voice was clear, determined. "She told me what happened at the diner. Tried to convince me you weren't worth the trouble." Maggie's heart clenched. "Jax." "I'm done with the past," he cut in, his voice firm and sure. "I'm choosing you." Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks as relief and joy flooded through her. She smiled, leaning against her car, letting his words wash over her like a healing balm. The familiar scent of coffee and pie filled the diner as Maggie sat across from Jax in their usual booth. The evening sun painted everything in warm, golden hues, making the moment feel almost dreamlike. They'd chosen this time because the diner was nearly empty, just a couple of regulars nursing their coffees at the counter. Jax's large hands wrapped around his coffee mug, his knuckles white with tension. Despite his imposing figure, there was something vulnerable about him now, something Maggie had never seen before. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice low and gravelly. "About us, about everything that's happened." Maggie nodded, her own hands fidgeting with her napkin. "Me too." "Claire coming back?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It made me realize something. I've been carrying around all this baggage, thinking I needed to fix everything for everyone else. But the truth is, I'm scared too, Maggie." She looked up, surprised by his admission. The tough exterior of the Hells Angels leader cracked just a little, showing the man underneath. "I'm scared of messing this up," he continued, gesturing between them. "Scared of not being enough, of bringing all my past problems into your life. You've had enough trouble without adding mine to the mix." Maggie felt her throat tighten. "Jax." "But here's the thing," he pressed on, leaning forward. "When I'm with you, I feel like maybe all that stuff doesn't matter so much. Like maybe we could build something new, something better." The last rays of sunlight caught in his beard, softening his features. His eyes, usually so fierce, held a gentleness that made Maggie's heart ache. "I know I'm not an easy man," he admitted. "The club, my responsibilities, the baby coming, It's complicated, but I want to try, Maggie. With you." She reached across the table, touching his arm. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "Every time something good happens, I keep waiting for it to fall apart. It's like I don't know how to trust good things anymore." Jax turned his hand over, catching her fingers in his. "Maybe we could learn together," he suggested. "I'm not asking for promises or guarantees, just a chance, a real one." Maggie looked at their joined hands, his large and weathered, hers small and pale. They were so different, and yet somehow they fit. "What about Claire?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "Claire is the mother of my child," he said firmly. "That won't change. But she's my past, Maggie. You—" He squeezed her hand gently. "You could be my future, if you want to be." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Maggie thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The lonely nights, the fear, that first desperate cry for help on a napkin. She thought about how Jax and his crew had shown her what family could really mean, how they'd given her strength when she needed it most. Looking into his eyes, she saw the same fears, the same hopes reflected back at her. This wasn't just about her anymore, or just about him. It was about both of them, choosing to be brave together. Taking a deep breath, Maggie squeezed his hand and said with quiet certainty, "I'm ready." Jax's smile spread slowly across his face, genuine and warm, lighting up his eyes. For the first time since they'd met, it felt real, like the beginning of something true and lasting. The rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot of Maggie's apartment complex early, Saturday morning. One by one, members of the Hells Angels pulled up, their bikes gleaming in the morning sun. Jax led the group, followed by Rusty and several others, each carrying tools and supplies. Maggie stood in her doorway, watching in amazement as the intimidating group of men filed up the stairs to her second-floor apartment. Their leather vests caught the light, patches and emblems telling stories of brotherhood and loyalty. "Time to fix this place up proper," Jax announced, giving her a warm smile. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he surveyed her small living room. The apartment wasn't much, just a modest one-bedroom with worn carpet and faded wallpaper. But it was hers, and now these men were here to help make it better. Two of the guys immediately started working on the leaky kitchen faucet that had been driving her crazy for months. Another group began replacing the wobbly ceiling fan, while others tackled the drafty windows that made winter nights unbearable. Rusty approached her with a gentle expression that seemed at odds with his weathered face and graying beard. "While they're working on the place, thought maybe we could talk about something important." He gestured toward the small balcony. Outside, Rusty leaned against the railing. "World ain't always kind to people like us, people who've had it rough. Sometimes you gotta know how to stand up for yourself." Maggie nodded, understanding what he meant. Her past relationships had taught her how vulnerable she could be. "I can teach you some basic self-defense," Rusty offered. "Nothing fancy, just practical stuff. How to break a hold, how to get away if someone grabs you. Might help you feel safer." Inside, the sound of power tools and good-natured bickering filled the air. Someone had turned on an old radio, and classic rock provided a soundtrack to their work. "Thank you," Maggie said softly. "I'd like that." Throughout the morning, more offers of help came. Big Mike, one of the older members, mentioned he could look at her car's transmission. Tommy, who worked as an electrician, promised to upgrade her ancient fuse box. Each of them found some way to contribute, to show they cared. During a break, they all gathered in her small kitchen. The space that usually felt empty now buzzed with life and warmth. Someone had brought coffee and donuts, and the men passed them around, sharing stories and jokes. Maggie stood in the middle of it all, watching these rough-looking men who had such gentle hearts. They included her in their conversations, asked her opinion on repairs, and treated her with a respect she hadn't known in years. A lump formed in her throat as she realized what was happening. These weren't just Jax's friends helping out of obligation. They had taken her under their wing, made her part of something bigger than herself. Rusty caught her eye from across the room and gave her a knowing nod. He understood what this meant to her. They all did. They had all been, lost once, had all needed someone to believe in them. Maggie looked around at the group of men who had become her unlikely guardians. Their leather vests and tattoos no longer seemed intimidating. Instead, they represented protection, loyalty, and acceptance. In this moment, surrounded by their laughter and care, she felt the last of her walls crumbling. These men, these rough, kind-hearted souls, had become her family. Claire sat in her car outside the diner, watching Maggie finish her shift through the large windows. Her manicured nails tapped against the steering wheel as she plotted her next move. The sight of Maggie's easy smile, the way she moved with newfound confidence, made Claire's blood boil. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "It's time," she said softly. "Do exactly as we discussed." Inside the diner, Maggie was wiping down tables when a group of unfamiliar bikers walked in. They weren't Hell's Angels. Their patches belonged to a rival gang. They settled into a booth, their eyes following her every move. "Hey, sweetheart," one called out. "Heard you're Jax's new girl." Maggie's hands trembled as she approached their table. Before she could respond, Claire swept in, looking elegant in her designer clothes. She sat down with the bikers, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Maggie," Claire's voice dripped with false concern. "I didn't expect to see you here, especially after what happened." Maggie frowned. "What are you talking about?" Claire pulled out her phone, showing Maggie a series of doctored photos. Jax with another woman, carefully edited to look recent. "He was with her last night. I thought you should know." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Old habits die hard, I suppose." The bikers chuckled, clearly in on Claire's scheme. Maggie's chest tightened, but she remembered Jax's words from the night before, his promises, his truth. She straightened her spine. "Nice try, Claire," Maggie said quietly. "But I trust Jax." Claire's smile faltered. She hadn't expected this strength from Maggie. She stood up, moving closer. "You really think he'll choose you over his child? Over our family?" The diner's door swung open, and Jax walked in. His eyes narrowed at the scene before him, Claire standing too close to Maggie, the rival bikers watching with amusement, the obvious tension in the air. "Claire," his voice was low, dangerous. "What are you doing?" "Just having a friendly chat," Claire said sweetly, showing Maggie some interesting photos. Jax crossed the room in quick strides. The rival bikers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado fading under his glare. He took one look at Claire's phone and shook his head. "Enough," he growled. "Outside. Now." In the parking lot, Claire's composure cracked. "You can't just throw away what we had," she shouted. "We're having a baby." "And I'll be there for my child," Jax said firmly. "But us? We're done, Claire. Have been for a long time." "Because of her?" Claire spat. "That pathetic little waitress?" "Because of you," Jax corrected her. "Because of your lies, your manipulation, your games. I'm done playing them. I'm moving forward with Maggie." Claire's face contorted with rage. She stepped closer to Jax, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." She turned on her heel, stalking back to her car. Before getting in, she shot Jax one last glare, her eyes promising trouble. The car's engine roared to life, and she peeled out of the parking lot, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the echo of screeching tires. Maggie sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her tired face as she waited for the doctor to return with her mother's test results. The call had come early that morning. Her mother had fallen again, this time harder than before. The vinyl chair squeaked as she shifted her weight, her mind racing with worry. Her mother's condition had been deteriorating steadily over the past few months, but this fall felt different, more serious. The thought of what might come next made her stomach churn. Heavy footsteps approached, and she looked up to find Jax walking toward her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. His presence, solid and reassuring, helped ease some of the tension in her shoulders. "Any news?" he asked, handing her a cup. Maggie shook her head, wrapping her fingers around the warm paper cup. "Not yet. But the nurse said it doesn't look good. They're talking about round-the-clock care." Jax settled into the chair beside her, his large frame making the small hospital chair look even smaller. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know," Maggie admitted, her voice cracking. "I can't leave her alone anymore, but I can't be there all the time either. I have work and—" She paused, glancing at him. "And us." The doctor appeared then, clipboard in hand. Her mother's fall had caused a minor fracture, but the bigger concern was her overall declining health. She needed constant supervision and medical care, more than Maggie could provide on her own. "There are some excellent care facilities in the area," the doctor suggested gently. "Places where she'd receive professional care around the clock." Maggie's throat tightened. The thought of putting her mother in a home felt like failure, like she was abandoning her only remaining family. But deep down, she knew she couldn't handle it alone anymore. Back in her mother's room, Maggie watched her sleep. The woman who had once been so strong, who had raised her alone after her father left, now looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. Tubes and wires surrounded her, monitoring every breath and heartbeat. "I can't do it anymore, Jax," she whispered, feeling his steady presence behind her. "But how can I put her in a home? She's all I've had for so long." Jax placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch gentle despite his rough exterior. "You're not giving up on her, Maggie. You're getting her the help she needs. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one." "But what if she hates me for it?" "She won't," he assured her. "Your mother loves you. She wouldn't want you sacrificing your whole life trying to do something that professionals are better equipped to handle." Tears slid down Maggie's cheeks as she considered his words. She thought about the endless nights of worry, the constant fear of another fall, the way her own life had been shrinking as her mother's needs grew. "I'll help you research facilities," Jax offered. "The guys know people. We'll make sure she gets into somewhere good. You're not alone in this, Maggie." She turned to face him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "You'd do that?" "Of course. You're family now, which means your mother is too." Maggie looked back at her sleeping mother, then reached for the informational packets the doctor had left. With Jax's arm around her shoulders, she began to read through them, finally ready to make the difficult but necessary choice. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that taking care of herself didn't mean abandoning her mother. It meant finding a better way to help them both. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through the open windows of Jax's small house. Maggie sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by real estate listings and apartment brochures. Sunlight streamed in, casting warm patches across the scattered papers. "What about this one?" Jax pointed to a listing for a cozy 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. His finger traced the outline of the wraparound porch in the photo. "It's got character," and it's close enough to your mom's care facility for regular visits. Maggie leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his. The house looked perfect, not too big, not too small, with a yard that would be perfect for summer barbecues. "It's beautiful," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "And look, there's even a garage for your bike." Jax chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Already thinking about my bike, huh?" He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We could make it our own, you know. Paint the walls whatever color you want. Maybe plant a garden." "I've never had a garden before," Maggie mused, letting herself imagine it. "My mother used to grow tomatoes when I was little, before she got sick. I always wanted to try it myself." "Then we'll plant tomatoes," Jax said simply, as if making her dreams come true was the easiest thing in the world. "And whatever else you want. This is our fresh start, Maggie. No more looking over our shoulders, no more living in the shadows of what happened before." The sound of motorcycles rumbling up the driveway interrupted their planning. Through the window, they could see several members of the Hells Angels pulling up, their bikes gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Did you tell them to come over?" Maggie asked, gathering up the scattered papers. "They might have caught wind that we were house hunting today," Jax admitted with a grin. "You know how they are. Can't keep anything from them for long." The front door burst open, and Rusty walked in carrying a cake box, followed by several other members. "Hope you two lovebirds are hungry," he called out. "We figured this called for a celebration." More bikers filed in, filling Jax's small kitchen with their presence. Despite their intimidating appearance, they moved carefully around Maggie, treating her with a gentleness that still surprised her sometimes. "Let me get that," one of them said, taking the papers from her hands and setting them safely aside. Another started pulling paper plates from a bag, while someone else produced bottles of champagne. "To new beginnings," Rusty declared, popping open the first bottle with a loud bang that made Maggie jump. Jax's arm tightened around her reassuringly as plastic cups were passed around. The cake was revealed, a simple sheet cake with "Welcome Home" written in blue frosting. It wasn't fancy, but the sentiment behind it made Maggie's eyes well up with tears. "You guys didn't have to do all this," she said, looking around at the faces of these men who had become her unlikely family. "Course we did," Rusty replied gruffly. "You're one of us now, both of you, and we take care of our own." Jax raised his cup. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To family," everyone echoed, and Maggie felt the words resonate in her heart. Standing there in the warm kitchen, surrounded by love and acceptance, she realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along, a place to belong. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the park's winding paths as Maggie and Jax walked hand in hand. The warmth of his large, calloused palm against hers made her feel safe, grounded. Children played on the swings in the distance, their laughter carried on the gentle breeze, while elderly couples sat on benches, feeding breadcrumbs to eager ducks. Maggie breathed in deeply, taking in the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Her steps felt lighter these days, free from the constant weight of anxiety that had plagued her for so long. She glanced up at Jax, studying his profile, the strong jaw partially hidden beneath his thick beard, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Jax asked, catching her gaze. "Just how different everything feels now," Maggie replied, squeezing his hand. "A few months ago, I could barely leave my apartment without feeling scared. Now look at me, walking in the park, planning a future, actually feeling happy." Jax's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "You did that yourself, you know. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." They passed a flower bed bursting with colorful tulips. A butterfly danced, around the blooms, its wings catching the sunlight. Maggie watched it, mesmerized by its delicate beauty and freedom. "I didn't think I deserved this," she admitted softly. "After everything that happened with my ex, with Mom getting sick, I thought maybe that was just my lot in life, to be alone, to be afraid." Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. His blue eyes, usually so fierce, were soft as they met hers. "Nobody deserves to live in fear, Maggie. What happened to you wasn't your fault." She nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not sad tears, but tears of relief, of acceptance. "I know that now. Being with you, having the support of the club, it's helped me see things differently." They continued walking, following the path as it curved around toward the lake. The water sparkled in the late afternoon light, small waves lapping gently at the shore. A family of ducks paddled by, the mother leading her ducklings in a neat row. "You know," Jack said, his voice thoughtful, "when Claire left me, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just focus on the club, keep my walls up, didn't want to risk getting hurt again." He paused, looking out over the water. "Then you came along with that napkin asking for help, and something just clicked." Maggie leaned into his side, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I was so scared that day. I never imagined those moments would lead to this." They reached the edge of the lake, stopping to watch the sun's reflection dance on the water. The world seemed to quiet around them, creating a pocket of peace that belonged to them alone. Jax turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. His eyes held such tenderness that Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. He leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that spoke of love, of promise, of healing. When they pulled apart, Jax rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Maggie," he whispered. "You saved me." Maggie smiled, feeling the truth of the moment settle deep in her soul. She had saved him, just as he had saved her. They had found each other when they needed it most. Two broken pieces making something whole and beautiful together. The bell above the bakery door chimed as Maggie tied her crisp white apron around her waist. Morning sunlight streamed through the large front windows, catching the display cases and making the freshly polished glass sparkle. The sweet scent of vanilla and warm butter filled the air, mixing with the rich aroma of brewing coffee. Sarah, the bakery owner, smiled warmly as she showed Maggie around the kitchen. "The recipes are simple enough to follow," she explained, pulling out a worn notebook filled with handwritten instructions. "Just take your time and don't be afraid to ask questions." Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her first bag of flour. The weight felt good in her hands, solid, real. She thought about how different this was from her old job at the truck stop, where every day had felt like survival. "You've got this," Sarah assured her, patting her shoulder. "I can tell you have a gentle touch. That's important in baking." Throughout the morning, Maggie lost herself in the rhythm of measuring, mixing, and kneading. There was something therapeutic about working with dough, watching it transform under her hands. When her first batch of chocolate chip cookies came out of the oven, golden brown and perfect, pride swelled in her chest. The roar of a motorcycle engine drew her attention to the window. Jax pulled up outside, his leather jacket catching the sun. He'd been doing this every morning since she started, showing up during her break with coffee and encouragement. "Those smell amazing," he said as he entered, breathing in deeply. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her flour-dusted appearance. "Look at you, already looking like a pro." Maggie blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Sarah's been really patient with me. I actually made these all by myself." She held out a warm cookie. Jax took a bite, and his eyes widened. Damn, sweetheart. These are incredible. He reached for another one, but Maggie playfully swatted his hand away. Those are for paying customers, she teased, feeling light and happy. It still amazed her sometimes, how natural things felt with him now. The morning rush began, and Maggie found herself serving customers with growing confidence. Each smile she received, each compliment about her baking, built her up a little more. She watched as people gathered around the small tables, sharing coffee and conversation over her pastries, creating moments of joy she had helped make possible. Just before closing time, the rumble of multiple motorcycles filled the street outside. Maggie looked up to see the entire Hell's Angels crew parking their bikes in front of the bakery. Jax led them in, carrying a small cake box. "What's all this?" Maggie asked, her heart warming at the sight of these tough men filing into the dainty bakery, looking slightly out of place among the pastel walls and delicate displays. "Just wanted to celebrate your first week," Jax said, setting the box down and opening it to reveal a beautiful cake decorated with the words, "Proud of you, Maggie." Sarah appeared from the kitchen, beaming. "I helped him plan it," she admitted. "You've been such a wonderful addition to our little bakery family." The Hell's Angels gathered around, their usual intimidating presence softened by genuine smiles and proud looks. Rusty, one of the older members, cleared his throat. "You've come a long way, kid. It's good to see you finding your path." Maggie stood among them, surrounded by the unlikely family she'd found, the fierce bikers who had become her protectors, the gentle baker who had given her a chance, and Jax, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Tears of happiness pricked at her eyes as she took in the moment, feeling truly, completely at home. The small white house sat on a quiet street, its faded paint and creaky steps telling stories of years gone by. But to Maggie and Jax, it was perfect. The moment they'd walked through the front door, holding hands and dreaming of possibilities, they knew this would be their home. Today, the street echoed with the rumble of motorcycles as the Hell's Angels pulled up, trucks loaded with paint cans, tools, and supplies. Maggie watched from the front steps as Jax directed his brothers, their leather vests traded for old t-shirts and work clothes. "Where do you want this couch, darlin'?" Rusty called out, helping another member lift a comfortable second-hand sofa from the back of his pickup. "Living room, please," Maggie answered, her chest tight with emotion at their kindness. She'd never had so many people willing to help her before. Inside, the house slowly transformed. The walls, once dingy and yellow, brightened with fresh paint in soft, warm colors. Jax worked alongside his brothers, his strong hands gentle as he fixed loose floorboards and hanging cabinet doors. Every now and then, he'd catch Maggie's eye and wink, making her heart flutter just like it had that first day in the diner. In the kitchen, Maggie arranged her new baking supplies, wedding gifts from her co-workers at the bakery. The afternoon sun streamed through the window above the sink, catching the mixing bowls and making them shine. She could already imagine the smells of fresh bread and cookies filling this space. "Hey," Jax's voice came from behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, and she leaned back against his chest. "You happy?" "More than I've ever been," she whispered, turning in his embrace to face him. His beard was flecked with white paint, and his t-shirt was covered in sawdust, but he'd never looked more handsome to her. Throughout the day, the house came together piece by piece. The Hell's Angels worked tirelessly, their rough exterior softening as they helped create this sanctuary for their brother and his bride. They hung curtains, assembled furniture, and even planted flowers in the small garden out front. Tough men doing tender things out of love. As evening approached, the work wound down. The brothers gathered their tools, accepting Maggie's grateful hugs and Jax's firm handshakes. One by one, they rode away, leaving the newlyweds to settle into their new home. The porch swing, a surprise gift from the crew, swayed gently in the evening breeze. Jax and Maggie sat together, his arm around her shoulders, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The street was quiet now, peaceful. Through the open windows behind them, the fresh paint smell mingled with the springtime air. Maggie curled closer to Jax, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. The house behind them might be modest, with its small rooms and simple furnishings, but it was filled with more love than she'd ever known. Every repair, every brushstroke, every carefully placed piece of furniture represented the care and support of their unlikely family. Looking up at Jax, her heart so full it felt like it might burst, Maggie softly said, "This is what I've always wanted." The phone call came just as Jax and Maggie were finishing dinner in their new kitchen. Jax's face darkened as he listened, his knuckles white around the phone. Maggie watched him pace, her heart sinking as she recognized the tension in his shoulders, the same tension she'd seen when Claire had come back into their lives. "I understand," Jax said gruffly into the phone. "I'll be there in 20. He ended the call and stood still for a moment, his back to Maggie. "What is it?" she asked softly, coming up behind him and placing a gentle hand on his arm. Jax turned to face her, his eyes troubled. "The club needs me. There's trouble with a rival group moving into our territory. They're threatening some of the businesses under our protection." Maggie's stomach clenched. She knew about the Hells Angels' protective role in the community, how they kept the peace, looked after local businesses, made sure things ran smoothly, but she also knew the dangers that came with it. "They want me to lead a response," Jax continued, running a hand through his beard. "Show them we're still strong, still in control." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Maggie could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull between his responsibility to the club and his promise of a peaceful life with her. "I thought those days were behind us," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jax pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "They were supposed to be. I've been trying to change things, make the club more legitimate. But some of the old guard, they want to handle things the old way." Through the kitchen window, Maggie could see their garden, the flowers the Hells Angels had planted just days ago, already starting to bloom. The sight of those tender plants, nurtured by rough hands, reminded her of how much Jax had already changed, how much they'd all changed. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Jax stepped back, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I've been thinking about this for a while now. The club, it saved my life once, gave me purpose when I had none. But now..." He looked around their kitchen, at the home they'd built together. "Now I have a different purpose." He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "The club needs to evolve, or it'll destroy itself. Some of the brothers understand that, but others, they're stuck in the past. And I can't keep fighting that battle." "You're going to step down," Maggie said softly. It wasn't a question. Jax nodded slowly. "I need to pass the leadership to someone who can bridge the old and the new. Rusty, he gets it. He can handle things better than I can now." He turned back to Maggie, his eyes clear and determined. "I choose us, Maggie. I choose our future." Maggie crossed the kitchen to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She could feel his heart beating steady and strong against her cheek. "Are you sure? The club has been your life for so long." "You're my life now," he said simply, "and I'm done letting the past control our future." He pulled out his phone again, his fingers hovering over the keypad. This call would change everything, end one chapter of his life, and begin another. But as he looked down at Maggie, at the love and trust in her eyes, he knew it was the right choice. The evening breeze drifted through the open windows of their small house, carrying the sweet scent of jasmine from their garden. Maggie sat curled up on their worn leather couch, a blanket draped over her legs, watching Jax as he built a fire in their modest fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, softening his rugged features. "Remember that first day at the diner?" Maggie asked, her voice gentle in the quiet room. "I was so scared of you." Jax chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "Yeah, I remember. This tiny woman looking like she might bolt at any second." He settled beside her on the couch, and she automatically shifted to make room for his large frame. "Who would have thought we'd end up here?" Maggie reached for his hand, tracing the familiar calluses and scars. Each mark told a story, stories he'd shared with her over late-night conversations and quiet mornings. "I was broken back then," she admitted. "Didn't think I'd ever feel whole again." "We both were," Jax said, squeezing her hand. "Running from our pasts, afraid to trust." He glanced around their living room, at the photos on the walls, pictures of them with the Hell's Angels at various gatherings, snapshots of quiet moments, memories of their journey together. Look at us now. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been struggles, Claire's attempts to come between them, Maggie's fears, Jax's decision to step back from the Hell's Angels' leadership. But they'd faced each challenge together, growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. "My mom asked me yesterday if I'm happy," Maggie said, playing with a loose thread on the blanket. Her mother, now settled in a comfortable care facility, had become one of their biggest supporters. "I told her I finally understand what happiness really means." Jax turned to look at her, his eyes soft in the firelight. "And what does it mean?" "It's not about everything being perfect," she said thoughtfully. "It's about feeling safe enough to be imperfect, to be scared sometimes, to make mistakes, to grow." She smiled up at him. "It's about having someone who sees all your broken pieces and loves you anyway." "Come here," Jax said, his voice rough with emotion. He stood, pulling her up with him. "I want to show you something." He led her outside to their back porch, where two chairs faced the evening sky. Stars were just beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the darkening blue. They sat down, shoulders touching, hands still intertwined. "When I was in the service," Jax said quietly, "I used to look up at the stars on bad nights. Reminded me that there was something bigger than whatever hell I was going through." He paused, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. "Then with the Hell's Angels, I'd do the same thing. But I was always looking up alone." Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Not anymore," she whispered. "Not anymore," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as more stars appeared in the vast sky above them. The distant sound of crickets and the rustle of leaves created a peaceful symphony around them. The moment felt sacred somehow, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so beautifully ordinary. Two people who had found each other in the darkness, who had chosen to heal together, sitting hand in hand under the endless sky. Their journey hadn't ended. It was just beginning. But now they faced whatever came next together, stronger for all they'd overcome, ready for whatever the future might bring.